Hello, and welcome again to Veterans on the Front Porch, a show for and about veterans here in New Hampshire. My name is Clint Brown, and I'm your host, and today I want to welcome Dave Dube. Dave?
Hi, Clint. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, and I'm glad you could take time out to join us.
Oh, glad for doing this show. I think I give you a lot of credit for doing it to make people aware of veterans in the community.
Well, I try to tell people when they see that veterans plate, there's more to it than just a V on it. There's a story behind it. And to get to know the people who drive those, you know?
Especially ones that have like a vanity plate. Like
Right.
My plate is USMC 75.
Wow.
So people would say, well, is that the year you joined or the year you got out? And it's actually the year I joined. So
Okay. Marine Corps.
yes, in the Marine Corps.
And why did you join the Marines? What was it about the Marines?
Well, I wasn't a John Wayne kind of person, that's for sure. Basically, I grew up in the city of Hartford.
Uh-huh.
And I always wanted to be a chef, and that was my goal from working in Boy Scout camp, actually. And I wanted to become a chef, and the recruiter kind of dangled the carrot in front of me, saying, "Well, if you join now, you can get the Vietnam era benefits, and you can go to school for free." So I dropped out of high school when I was a junior.
Uh-huh.
And at that time, they took high school dropouts and
Right.
such, and your parents had to sign for you. I was only 17, and I enlisted of April of 75, which may be a Vietnam era vet,
Uh-huh.
and then started active duty in September of 75, which is the Cold War period.
Right.
And then went to that beautiful South Carolina resort, Parris Island, which was wonderful, and went to cook school. I was a cook in the Marine Corps. Someone had to feed us.
Yes, absolutely.
And cooks were very well liked as the supply guys. And
Oh, yeah.
there were certain people you didn't mess with. But I was a cook and learned how to make 1,500 portions of Salisbury steak and meatloaf and such. It was crazy. But my first duty station was Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, which, for a young 18-year-old coming out of the city of Hartford to Hawaii was quite the shock.
I'll bet it was.
I was attached to the Air Wing, the Marine Corps Air Wing. I was in several squadrons of fixed wing and helicopters. As they went out to do training or missions or something like that, we would bring supply people and administrative help to support the troops and such. And our squadron got attached to an LPH, a Navy ship.
Okay.
So I was on a Navy ship for quite some time as well, and I said to my gunnery sergeant, I'm like, I'm flying in helicopters and on a ship. He goes, well, you're a Marine, So it was like, okay, whatever. So cooked on a ship for quite some time, and our ship left Pearl Harbor and went to Subic Bay, Philippines was the home port.
What ship was that?
It was the LPH number 10 USS Tripoli.
Tripoli, okay.
Which is kind of basically a small aircraft carrier.
Yep.
And LPH meant landing platform for helicopters.
Right.
And it was mostly a combat ship that housed Navy personnel plus usually a helicopter squadron with a infantry unit, so that during times of conflict or war, they would helicopter the troops to the situation and go from there.
Probably replaced, because I was on the Ranger and over in the Tonkin, and I know we had a lot of helicopters. And so I'm thinking what you were on probably ended up replacing the carriers.
It may have. It's a smaller version of an aircraft carrier.
Right,
I can
yeah.
remember being in Subic Bay, and we would come up alongside like the Kitty Hawk or the Enterprise, and it was massive compared to our little ship. And I thought our ship was huge. And shipboard life is definitely different.
Yeah.
I've been asked to go on cruises, and I'm like, no, let's not do that. Well, it'll be different. I'm like, well, let's not find out if I'm in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
But the tour of duty at that time there was a lot of boat refugees, in 76 and 77, when the Khmer Rouge went in after the end of the Vietnam conflict.
Right.
With Pol Pot and Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So there was a lot of boat refugees at the time, and our tour of duty was to rescue boat refugees.
Wow.
So we would leave Subic Bay and then go to the coast of Vietnam and then go up the coast. There was quite a few boats, of fishing boats full of refugees. There was boats that were built for 10 people that had like 40 to 50 people,
Gee.
on these little fishing vessels.
It's amazing they stayed afloat.
There was some trauma. It was traumatic at time. You know, you'd pull up to the ships and the little fishing boats, and there was a smell and an aura and yelling and screaming and crying, and it was just, you know, to be an 18, 19-year-old, you know, young man at the time, it was pretty eventful and unexpected that I was going to go through such a thing, even though, you know, combat.
Now, where were they? I know they were leaving, but where were they headed for?
To freedom.
Just freedom, no matter where.
A lot of the small boats didn't have enough fuel to get them to where they wanted to go.
Wow.
A lot of them were broken down, you know, so they just basically just stood out there in the water, waiting, or hopefully, you know, to get rescued and such. So we would, you know, take them on the ship and medically and take care of them, you know, try to feed them. But there was like a lot of dehydration, a lot of, you know, illness, you know, happening. Didn't have much contact with the individuals ourselves, but we knew that's what we were doing because, you know, and then we would drop them off in refugee camps in like Hong Kong and Singapore, and then we would hit Taiwan or Japan on the way back to the Philippines, you know, scrape and paint and, you know, replenish and then go back and do that. And we were supposed to do that for 6 months, and then there was so many at the time that we got extended for 2 more months, so we spent another 2 months doing this.
Wow.
Which was quite the experience, and one of the greatest experience was not only doing humanitarian relief and efforts after the Vietnam situation, but it was also I saw places in the world I would never ever have dreamed
I'll bet you did.
to see and to visit, to understand cultures and be thankful and grateful for what we have here in America. You know, when people are you know, talking about situations here, and it's like, you know, I used to take a shower with a 5-gallon pail bucket with a margarine tub, and that was a shower, and that was, you know, a luxury.
Yeah.
And then we came back to Hawaii. My enlistment was up, and went back to Connecticut.
Wow. Now, when you were over there, what did you have any R&R? Rest and relaxation?
Yes, we did. Some of the things we can't really discuss
No,
on television.
we won't discuss it.
But yeah, there was a lot of places that were interesting. Just even knowing the people, eating the foods, you know, being a chef. After I got out, I went to culinary school in New York and appreciating the food. But I remember one of the times, aside from being having the R&R kind of part of it, but I lived in an area in the Philippines for a while, and there was children in the neighborhood, and they would I would play with them, you know, and they would teach me their games, and they were very simplistic games. They didn't have like, you know, balls and you know, toys that we know of. And I taught them, there were some kids, so one night there would be like 8 kids, the next night there'd be 16, then there would be like, it just grew every night. And I taught them things like Giant Step and Red Light and, you know, the games that we grew up with as children. And my friends would come over and like, you know, hey, Dave, we're going to go out in town. And I'm like, you know, just a second, guys, I'm in the middle of a game of Red Light. You know, so it kind of gives me a little gratitude and feeling that I made an inspiration on these children at some point, because I'm sure they taught their cousins or brothers and sisters, and it could be a legacy of positiveness and peacefulness, you know, to those kids. And,
well, obviously it was successful if your numbers kept growing. They could telling people, hey, this is fun.
Right, and of course, you know, I'd buy some sodas and some candy, so that, I'm sure that was an incentive as well.
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah. Okay, so you, when you got out, you went to culinary school.
Right.
And you said you dropped out of high school. Did you go back for your diploma?
Yes, what happened was, at that time too, if you can remember, there used to be high schools on the bases.
Right.
For soldiers and sailors and Marines and such to finish their high school diploma. Well, you know, quite frankly, being 18 years old and stationed in Hawaii, school was not my priority.
Right.
So I had about some time left, and I started going back to school, and then we get stationed overseas. And long story short, I came back. I did the math. I figured I have enough time to finish it, but we got extended for 2 months, and then went to my discharge situation. Went back to Hartford at 20 years old, still a high school dropout. So I called up the Board of Education, and I said, you know, here I am. And they said, well, we have a GED or we have an adult high school. So they said if you're a veteran, you can utilize your GI Bill, which at that time, for the Vietnam era, was they paid for your tuition and they gave you a stipend of like $346 a month.
Right.
So it was a kind of a no-brainer. I think I'll go back to adult high school, which I did and graduated, and then applied to Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York, which at the time was like one of the best culinary schools. Got accepted, and the VA paid for my full tuition and gave me a stipend as well. And then it was kind of funny because I was the group leader for my class. And at the end of graduation, because I kind of did like the Marine Corps style of talking abruptly or having that leadership quality, which I learned in the Marine Corps. And at the end of graduation, my class tie-dyed or tied a chef coat green and put sergeant stripes on it, put little medals on it, and gave me a chef hat that said Sergeant Dube on it. So that was kind of humorous, but another part of inspiring people, I think.
So you were an E5.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, which is a sergeant
Right,
or a petty officer in the Navy, I think. And then during that culinary school time, too, I enlisted in the Connecticut Army National Guard, which, I basically did for the money and just for the experience, too, but also to keep my tenure going. And was stationed over in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, again in the helicopter squadron.
Wow.
So that kind of worked out perfectly. And then my enlistment was up with that. Started working back in the restaurant industry in Hartford, and I said I should just continue my military service. I called the Marine Corps Reserve, and they said, well, we're an infantry unit. We don't need cooks. We go out in the woods and run around. And I'm like, well, I'm good.
Yeah, I'll bet you.
I didn't do that in the full time, so I went to the Navy recruiter, and they told me that you could be stationed at Groton Submarine Base in New London. So I joined the Navy. So I've been in 3 branches of the service.
Wow.
So
Wow, you really did serve.
just not the Air Force or the Army.
And now, but you haven't stopped with your service. Now you're doing stuff for veterans.
I continued my career in the food service industry. I worked in many different restaurants. I left Hartford and moved to Cape Cod and worked in the restaurants in there and such. And life changed as it does. I was very active with the Cape and Islands Veterans Outreach Center. Massachusetts has a great program for veterans in the Commonwealth, on a state level. And they had 9 outreach centers demographically placed throughout the Commonwealth. And there was one in Hyannis. And it was a small little group of Vietnam veterans. And they incorporated a club, per se, the Non-Vets Association, because at that time, if you remember, Vietnam vets weren't really well liked or welcomed into the VFWs and American, the congressionally chartered, organizations.
Because it wasn't considered a war.
Exactly, and that's also where the Vietnam Veterans of America got incorporated, VVA. But the Cape Cod crew did it locally, and created a group which still is in existence. And I was active on the board of directors with that. We brought the Moving Wall, which is a half-scale replica of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial to Hyannis. I forget which year it was. I think it was like 1990. The position of an executive director opened up for that. I was offered that position, so I got out of the restaurant business and managed a outreach center which advocated for veterans benefits, counseling, whether it was substance abuse or PTSD or housing, any other kind of advocacy that we could help out with a veteran and their family. Started a food pantry, for veterans there, and at that time, the Commissioner of Veteran Services on state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts level, Thomas J. Hudner, who's a Medal of Honor recipient from the Korean War, advocated for homelessness and housing projects for veterans. So I started the 3rd housing program in Massachusetts, a transitional house, or an SRO, which was a step above a shelter and a step below of having permanent housing, kind of like that limbo. It was a 10-room project, so I got grant money for that, or we got grant money for that, and we started that. Did that for about 3 years, I think it was, and then the same position opened up in Haverhill, Mass. And it was time for me to leave Cape Cod to move on. and was given the position, and then again took a little storefront outreach center which provided the same services, and was able, with the city help, we purchased an old Victorian mansion in Haverhill, in a very tough part of town. Got grants for it and renovated it into a 21-room transitional housing for veterans,
Well, that's great.
which is still in existence. And the house was beautiful. It was just beautiful. We called it the Veterans Mansion. And then from there, I was offered a position on a state level for the Department of Veterans Services, working in Boston. I started off as a authorizer, which authorized benefits for the whole state, and then became the license plate administrator, because you were talking about license plates.
Right,
I
right.
approved and authorized, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and veterans license plates throughout the state, working with the DMV, and I was also the training coordinator. So I went around the state and trained veterans agents on how to apply for state benefits and federal benefits and things of that nature. Then my wife at the time and I had a house up here in Tamworth, and we moved up here and started a restaurant in Ospey called Lazy Susan's.
Really?
Really. And we did that for about 8.5 years. And between that time as well, when I was in Haverhill, I brought the moving wall again,
Right.
with a coordinated team to Haverhill at Northern Essex Community College, and helped out a veterans group in Yountville, California, which ironically was flown out there to help them, do this, which was
Wow.
another great compliment. But did that, and then in Memorial Day weekend of 2008, having connections with the moving wall person, Vietnam Combat Limited out of Michigan, John Devitt, and I were good friends. I said, I want to bring the wall to Ospey. Long story short, he said, well, I have 3 weekends, this one, and Memorial Day weekend. It was like a no-brainer. We're going to do Memorial Day weekend, which we did, and we brought it to Ospey, May of 2008. So kept on that full circle, and a lot of veterans really appreciate it, plus families to
I know they
do the full circle of,
Yeah.
and it educated the children too, because before we brought it in, I would give talks to the kids at school, and try to tell them the history and what it was for and what it was about. And when the kids came, which I heard many times from the veterans, when the kids came, they were like very quiet and very respectful, and as it should be. It was
Yep.
it was a good healing process, for the community.
I've never been able to make the entire wall. I always get about halfway,
Hmm.
and names jump right out at
Mm-hmm.
you. You just, so it was difficult for me. Hopefully someday I can make the whole wall. Well, what are you doing now?
What am I doing now? Well, so I still try to stay active in the veterans community as much as I can. There isn't a lot of resources, or I am a member of the American Legion Post here in Wolfeboro.
You are?
I am. I'm also a life member of the Disabled American Veterans, and a life member of the Non-Vets Association of Cape and Islands. What I do now is I'm the store manager at Abbott and Staples in Ossipee,
Oh, okay.
which is ironically right next door to the restaurant I used to own, and right down the street from where the moving wall
Wow.
was. So there's kismet or something happening there.
You didn't go too far.
Didn't go too far, but I've been living in Wolfeboro for about 5 years, and before going to Abbott and Staples as a store manager, I was the grocery manager at Harvest Market in Wolfeboro.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of people may have seen me up there running the aisles or dragging those U-boats running around. So thanks for your support and such.
Right.
Today it's to see. I think one of the best things that's happened, with the Vietnam era is the lessons learned.
Yeah.
Just to see the troops that are out there now in Iraq and Afghanistan or anywhere, the amount of support from the community is the lessons that were learned from the Vietnam conflict, where we weren't treated well, nicely when we came home. And just to see and when we came home, I don't know about you, Clint, but I know that the Vietnam vets, basically they went there singularly and came home singularly. So there was no support where you see battalions or
Right.
companies coming back together. That's like a great thing, and that's what they learned.
And I was told when we got off the plane, they said, go right into the men's room and change into civilian clothes. Do not wear your uniform.
Mm.
So it was a long time before I ever said, yes, I'm a veteran,
because it wasn't popular. And
No, it sure
until
wasn't.
about the mid '80s, then it was kind of like glamorous to be a Vietnam veteran. So
Yeah.
there was like 10-year period or so that you never really spoke about it, or you didn't want to be because you were accused of being, But we did, whether you went in to be the John Wayne type or whatever. My definition of a veteran is a person gave a man or a woman gave a period of their life to do whatever it is their country asked them to do. So whether you were like me, just going in for the benefits or or making a career or learning a trade, you don't know what to expect. You could get orders to go to, the Philippines or the Arctic in a heartbeat. We all just gave a part of our lives to do whatever it is our country
We signed
needed
a
to do.
blank check
We did.
for a number of years.
We did.
Yeah. And like you said, you had no idea where you were going.
No.
I mean, you might fill out a dream sheet, and say, I'd like to go here. Well, good luck to you, because
Well, yeah, it was kind of funny because when I went to cook school, I graduated fourth out of my class.
Wow.
And the way it worked was the top two got meritoriously promoted. At that time it was to E3, a Lance Corporal, and the top four got to choose their duty station from the duty station
Really?
list. So I'm going, okay, I'm number 4, and 4 orders came in for Hawaii. So even though being a Marine, I didn't have my crayons, but I could still figure out the math that I'm possibly going to go to Hawaii. And the first gentleman took Yuma, Arizona. So I'm going, my odds are getting better. So long story short, I was able to choose my duty station. And
Wow.
I can remember telling my dad I was going to Hawaii, and he goes, I've been trying to go there all my life,
Yeah.
and here you are. I'm like, and Hawaii was a beautiful place. It was, but for 2 years, to live there, you get a little island happy after a while. My mom would send me like an oak leaf or a maple leaf during the fall and try to remind you, because I would call them up like a week before Christmas and say, it's 2 feet of snow out here, 2 below zero.
Right.
And I would say, yeah, it's 89 degrees. We're going to go to the beach again, So it was, again, coming up from the inner city of Hartford to see the countries I went to. I mean, I lived in the Philippines, was our home port. I've been to Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, all over the Western Pacific, which was great. An experience I'll never ever forget. I mean,
Right,
I can't tell you what happened yesterday, but I can tell you what happened,
Yeah.
40 years ago,
Yeah.
which is kind of scary.
It must have been difficult at first to actually cook for 1,500. What did you say?
It was a challenge, but there was the equipment was made to do that, and you had a lot of people, so it weren't like you were doing all by yourself. And basically, what a cook did in a mess hall like that, where you were assigned like one product. So if you had kernel of corn, you ended up with 80 cans of corn you had to open and put in a giant
Wow.
steam jacketed kettle. But cooking on a ship was definitely a challenge. I remember my first couple of days at sea. The Master Chief never came and gave you a lesson on the nomenclature of the equipment. It was a very small galley. It was very crowded, and we did, I forget how many portions we did. On a ship, you were stuck to the same amount.
Right.
And we did 4 meals a day, because if we did flight operations at night, we had to cook a meal. So you didn't have days off. There was no place to go. The sleeping conditions were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
The Navy guys had a great, billeting, racks or beds, to sleep in. But Marines on a transport, combat cruise ship, we had basically a metal rack with a piece of canvas and a very small, mattress that was. You had 200 guys in a room that was very small, stacked up
Wow.
like sardines. So it got a little crazy. But cooking on the ship, I can remember the first couple of days I was assigned pork loin. So I had 30 pieces of pork loin like this big. I put them in the pans, and I seasoned them. I put them in the oven, and I figured I got a couple of hours. I'll just wait. Well, I didn't know that. Well, what happened was the boat hit a swell,
Oh, no.
and 30 pork loins come flying out of the oven. And it was like a Lucy show, and it was like, ah!
Yeah.
So I quickly, put them back into the pans, because I didn't want the Master Chief to come and say what's going on. And I said, that's what those latches are next to the oven doors, to put the latches on. So you learn. And there was another time that we had been at sea for about a month. I had a really bad attitude. I was cranky. I was crabby. I was getting that short timers,
Yep,
I had
know
about
all
4 or
about it,
5
yeah.
months getting short. And it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. I needed some R&R. I needed to get off the ship. I just had this bad attitude. And there was like 2 grills in the aisle and a table and 2 grills next to that. And my workmate, Pancho Gallegos, he was making pancakes on the grill. And he had like a big vat, 80-gallon vat full of pancake batter with a little machine, like this thing. And I was doing little hash brown patties. And I'm thinking like, oh, this is terrible. I can't take it anymore. Well, the boat hit a swell, and this was when the water filtration system was out, so I'd been wearing the same clothes for like 3 days. The boat hit a swell. The pancake batter came rolling down the aisle, hits me in the knee. I fall right into the pancake batter.
No.
I said, I can't take it anymore. I threw my spatula down. I was covered head to toe full of pancake batter. Went down to my bed, or my area. Little pancake footprints following me down. I said I couldn't take it. The master at arms, which is the military police on a Navy ship, come down and say, Corporal, you have to go back to work. And I'm like, I can't take it anymore. You go back to work or go back to jail. So I went back to work. Yep. So it was just, there was like a lot of experience. Fried chicken was very scary when the boat was in a storm. So
I remember we had some guys doing target practice off the fantail. And one of the guys next to me says, if we're having chicken tonight, I'm not eating.
And the fantail was an interesting place because we had to dispose of trash.
Right.
Most of the burnables or, things like that was separated would be, going into the furnace or whatever. But, food and stuff went right off the fantail. And sharks would follow us because they knew it was a free meal. And to get replenished at sea, I don't know if you ever had that experience.
Oh, yes.
Was quite the task. Yeah. I can remember a whole pallet of eggs falling into the water.
Oh.
And it was like, I guess we're going to have eggs for a while. But, these are stories that people who haven't been through it, like you and other veterans, they tell these stories and they're going like, that didn't really happen. And it's like, I can't make it up.
No, we were out for a long time, at least 6 months.
Yeah.
And somebody said they saw fresh milk being loaded aboard. Well, fresh milk? Are you kidding me? I mean, everybody, lined up for that because you didn't get fresh milk.
And cooking again, we'll go back to a cooking story. It was like if you were at sea, we tried to do the best we could with what we had.
Right.
The produce was very, beautiful on, 1 or 2 or 3 days, but come to the very end of your cruise or, things got a little funky. But I can remember trying to cook eggs, and, we had a grill, and the chow line would come by. And if the boat was, the boat rocked and rolled. And, it wasn't like a regular cruise ship. It had movement. And you would put the egg on the grill and the yolk would stay like this and the white would go like that. And it's like, you're having scrambled. That's all we're making. No over easies today. So.
Yeah.
It was humorous.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that is interesting. And, again, I thank you very much for your service. I think a lot of people, I never realized how tough it was to be a chef on board ship. But now, after listening to you, I can remember how tough those guys must have had it.
And I definitely wouldn't call us chefs. We were cooks, And one of the good things, too, about it was while I was on the ship, again, the other thing, too, was like the layout of the galley plus the layout of where the freezers were. You had to go down like 2 decks to get the freezer stuff. It was a lot of hard work. Thank God we were young. But my commanding officer saw that I had talent, and I was promoted from the troop mess to the wardroom. To where the officers
that is a promotion.
Which is like they had plates instead of the metal trays, and so then they ate a little bit better. But then even better, as you might know, was the chief's mess. That was the best mess.
Really?
So the sergeant major overrode the colonel and said, we want to get, Corporal Dube into our chief's mess. The chief's mess was a closed mess, which meant the chiefs of the Navy chiefs and the Marine E7s and above gun research pooled their money and bought their own food.
Oh.
So they were having, prime rib, lobster tails, movies at night with ice cream.
Wow.
There was like a lot of French benefits for that. So I worked one day on in the chief's mess, and the Navy sailor cook would work on the other day. So the poor guy standing in the chow line to get that gray-colored pork loin with lumpy potatoes and such, we'll be sitting there going like, "What are you guys having?" "Oh, we're just having prime rib tonight." And of course, I get to eat, the same food. So it was, working in the Chiefs mess was golden. That was the place to be.
Huh?
A lot of perks, and being a cook. Whether you were on land or at sea, people took care of you. So if you needed laundry done, any extras, well, if you help me out, I'll help you out. Well, I need a new pair of boots, and I need an extra sandwich. It really wasn't his boots, and it really wasn't your sandwich. You know how it worked.
Yes.
Everybody was happy.
Yep, we traded a lot for fresh coffee.
Yep.
Because after about 6 days, the coffee gets a little ripe. Yeah, I can remember that very well. The perps, because I was a petty officer, and there were times when we ate better. But when you get in the chow line, there was one time when the admiral was on board, and they were serving steak. And boy, those are nice cuts of steak. Well, the next day he wasn't on board, but I looked down the line, I saw these big pieces of meat, and I'm going, "Oh, more steak." Well, it wasn't. It was liver, and liver and I don't get along. And, I just looked at that and I thought, "Oh boy." Anyways, the guy next to me said, "Oh, I love liver," so he had mine.
and being a cook too. I mean, you talk about the steaks. If steak was on the menu for usually on a weekend when I was in Hawaii, we cooked these steaks like 4 hours ahead of time.
Really?
Because if you're doing like 1,500 portions, you don't have time to do it to order. We would cook everything ahead of time and put them in these warming pieces of equipment that stayed there, and we would just put them in the chow line as we just rapidly fed people. And but if you were a cook, you held your steak to the end, you ate it on your own terms, and it was kind of funny. There was the perks too where payday night, nobody went to the mess hall.
Right, absolutely.
Everybody went out in town or to the Chinese restaurant or McDonald's or whatever back in the day. But the night before payday, everybody came to Mom's because they had no money, and it was all you can eat, food and such. And it was funny because they would criticize the food, but when they really wanted it, it was there.
Yeah.
And we would cook our own stuff, and it was kind of interesting. Coming back from overseas, when I went back into the mess hall, I was in charge of the snack line, which was another separate part of the mess hall where they just did hamburgers and hot dogs,
right? Yeah.
Which was great. And I walked around like I was the king of the roost, because I just came back from overseas. I was seasoned, and everybody's like, "Oh wow," looking up.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny. It was very funny.
Well, this has been great, and I really thank you. I know you called me because you saw the piece in the paper, and I want to thank Jim Collins for writing that, and because he hadn't, I wouldn't be able to sit here with you, and this is great.
Likewise, and I appreciate what you're doing, and I think if there's any other veteran out there that can share their story, I mean, that's what it's all about. The more that, especially women veterans too, because you have to give a lot of props to the women that served in the military as well.
Absolutely.
Because even back when we were in, there weren't many, and they ended up being like admin people. Today's women are doing a great job and doing what that should be have done years ago. And maybe more women should call Clint up and get in touch, and we'd like to hear your side of the
I'd
story
love to hear
as well.
a story from a woman.
And even whether you're a combat veteran or a peace, a veteran is a veteran. There are still a lot of Vietnam veterans that never even went to Vietnam. They're era vets, could have been stationed in Kansas City. But, a story is a good story.
It is.
And it's better than sitting around the VFW with a beer and, talking about it's educating the people who are non-military, yet supportive of veterans. Because,
Absolutely.
We are a special breed.
And that's what I always tell people. There are things that we can talk about that other people just wouldn't understand.
Right.
Especially when we start using the lingo.
Exactly. And during this interview, I was filtering in my mind, like I can't say this word or say that word because no one would really understand it. But you and I, we would know what we're talking about.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, again, thank you.
Well, thank you, Clint.
I'm so glad you came.
And welcome home.
Welcome home to you, sir. Yes. Well, that'll do it for this version of Veterans on the Front Porch. We certainly hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to our next show. Until then, this is Clint Brown saying goodbye.